and welcome to today's Live from the Studio with Phoebe Bei. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Emmett Hanley, and I am the Indigenous Curatorial Assistant here at Griffin Art Projects. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stalo nations, to whom we are deeply grateful. As well, we would like to thank the North Vancouver Rec and Culture, the BC Arts Council, as well as the Phoebe Foundation for their support of our residency program. Without further ado, I will introduce Phoebe Bei, who is a participant of our Through a BIPOC Lens Residency Series. Phoebe Bei is an emerging artist who working largely in image-based processes and installation. Her work navigates fictional and existing embodiments of land, how land is occupied and disseminated in the production of home, culture, and identity. Bei was British Columbia's recipient of the BMO First Art Prize in 2018 and holds a BFA from Simon Fraser University. Her work has been exhibited at the Audain Gallery, the Justina M. Barnaky Gallery, the James Black Gallery, and Orr Gallery. Originally from Edmonton, Alberta, which is Treaty 6 territories, Bei is currently occupying and working on the unceded Coast Salish territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Now we'll hear from you, Phoebe.
Hi, Amit. Thank you for the introduction. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can, and I'll be turning off my screen now if that works for you.
Okay, yeah, great. Thank you. Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for taking the time out of your day to allow space for me to share with you some of my projects, ideas, and things that I've been working on throughout the course of my time here at the studio. Before I begin, I would like to first thank the team at the Griffin Art Projects for your work and continuous dedication to allow this residency to happen. I've been really appreciative of the space that I had to expand upon some of my works and thoughts. I would also like to extend my gratitude to Emmett, Lisa, and Fane for your warm welcome, your continuous support throughout my stay at the residency. I thought it might be best with our time together, to first talk through some of my past projects that are relevant to the residency and ideas that I'm exploring here at the studio. So without further ado, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, Emmett, can you see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, are you able to see my notes as well?
I do see no notes.
No notes. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Okay, so before I dive into this piece, Dream Home Point 5, I thought it might be best to give you a holistic sense of my past body of work. As you'll see that the way that I express my ideas and the materials that I use are a bit eclectic, and you'll see that ideas are strung from one project to the next, and within these sort of moving webs of ideas, at its core, my interest lies in two sort of foundational elements, one being the spectacle and the romanticized, whether that be the romanticization of land, of images, of events like the Olympic Games or Expo 86. And secondly, I'm interested in photography in the sense of like the image. And when I speak about the image, I mean the subject and the themes and the references that ultimately build the form of the photo. outside of the image, outside of these frameworks, I'm contextually influenced by my mother's experiences. And when I was compiling slides for this talk, I was kind of surprised by how she's embedded herself within my thinking, both subconsciously, but also consciously. And I think this happens because of how I'm trying to grapple with my own experiences and how her experiences speak to not only mine, but a collective sense of our surroundings. So to dive into this piece, Dream Home Point 5, which is a second rendition of this piece, and I will be showing you the first edition in a few slides. To give you some background about this piece, if you look at the backdrop here, and then again in the backdrop, there is an image, and this image is an artist rendering of a neighborhood in Edmonton, Alberta, where I was raised. This neighborhood actually used to be a military base during World War II, but it's since been turned into this residential village. After the war, the Canadian government deemed this land no longer usable, but very much profitable for both residential and commercial use. So what happened here is that this land was then given to a federal corporation called the Canada Land Company, who reclaimed this land and many other lands with any historical or military background and redevelop it into these residential villages as well as public attractions. And these images, sorry, I'm just going to take a peek at my notes to just ground myself here a bit. So this neighborhood is actually where my family used to reside, which was once marketed as, quote, committed to ensuring the legacy of land to which it is entrusted. End quote. In ongoing discussion around usage of land, the notion of the ideal is a contested subject. Who is ideal and what ideals are we building for? On what legacy and forgotten histories are we building on? What is ideal and how is it constructed? These are some of the questions that I am thinking about while making this work. While living in this neighborhood and walking through the space, you will find that there are flags, plaques, monuments, statues, streets that are named in relationship to the war. And I was really drawn to how nationalism and war is capitalized in generating value and meaning in a space and thereby creating monetary value. There is sort of this contrived novelty that I wanted to really dive into. And what I decided to do was to look at home advertisement videos of this neighborhood, which are images and projections of an ideal space to live that I was familiar to. As a kid, my mom would often drive my sister and I to showrooms, and this is how we would spend our pastimes, kind of looking at these perfect places. And with those sort of projections and imageries, I wanted to create if we jump back to the slide here, a photo studio / storefront furniture display to sort of talk about how the image of the ideal home is constructed by deconstructing it. And I did this by bringing forth photo equipments, often unseen in the image, but very much in front and in the image. The wooden cutouts that you see here are actually cutouts from the home advertisements. Just going to give you an example here. So this was a study, a performative study that I did in preparation of the dream home. And in the back, this screen, you'll see decor that I've screenshot and then photoshopped and then glued these images onto plywood and MDF. And I really wanted to play with the sense of both what is real and what is illusion. The actual objects like the white stool, I think there was a candle behind this image, and the bowls in the dish rack refer to many of the other images and videos that I was directly referring to. The white stool actually served, maybe not in so much in this rendition of the work, but in this initial display of the work, which I did for my BFA show at the Aldine Gallery in the Woodwards building. There you are able to, I created a stage because of where the window was. There was a ledge. So I created a stage where the viewer was encouraged, sort of forced to walk into this photo shoot, both embedding oneself in both the deconstruction and construction of the ideal home. Interestingly enough, at that time, Structube was still operating, and they had their furniture display that was on right across from the street, and I wanted to create that dialogue between the two display. And the stool that you see was actually purchased from Structube, but I since then decided to return it, and I kept the receipt and returned it, yeah. And here are two images that I've taken utilizing a disposable camera. This piece was for Unipid's I Spy project, which they've asked participants to take images based on a I Spy prompt. My prompt for this project was I Spy resistance through the concrete. And when I was thinking about this prompt and acts of resistance, I really thought about this site where these images were taken. In this image, you'll see that I wanted to, again, work with land and place, and decided to embed myself with the land and mimic the piles of topsoil and gravel. This land was actually located in the city of Richmond, which I lived in during my studies. And this particular section of land used to house anti-aircraft weapons. And again, it was pitched for redevelopment by the Canada Land Company. But in this case, as opposed to the residential village that I lived in Edmonton, the community of Richmond was really against and resistant of this idea, and really desired a green space and an urban farm for this place. So this eventually led the city of Richmond to purchase this land, and the topsoil and the gravel that I was performing with became what is now known as the Garden City land in Richmond. So around this time, in 2019, I worked for a gentleman who had a business in a store consigning archival materials. And he consigned things like black and white images, colored as well, ephemeras, memorabilia. And while working at his store, I came across a lot of images of travel photographs, mostly in front of tourist destinations, national parks. And I again became interested in the spectacle of it, the consumptive quality of nature, and then decided that I wanted to work with more identifiable images of Canadian identity. And since then, I've been collecting duplicates of Canadian Rocky postcards. And so moving away from works that were more personally related to where I was living, I decided to work with these images. And this is one of the first interactions with the postcards. And in this image, in this work, I decided to bring in a pile of peat moss. It looks like soil, but it's actually peat moss. I did initially wanted to bring in dirt into the space. However, I wasn't logistically allowed to bring in soil and decided on peat moss, which I think actually worked quite well in constructing this piece. I think the mimicry of soil kind of speaks to the duplicates of the postcards and allude to the hills that we actually see in the images, as well as the reproduction and the representation of nature. So far, how I've worked with images have been through deconstructing images within space. And I really wanted to work with, when it came to the postcards, the material surface directly onto the image itself. And within these studies you see here, I developed a technique where I would overlay postcards with a layer of oil pastel and then remove the oil pastel with colored pencil. In both of these cases, I remove the postcard with a white pencil crayon, which gave this sort of stained and grid-like structure to the postcard. And the work eventually became material for a video piece that I've made in 2020 titled "This Is Not a Romance." And in this video, I have an audio of a conversation that I had with my mother about her sort of experiences, her first experiences with snow and Banff, and her first job, as well as her singing songs, both in English and in Mandarin. Both of these songs were about love and desire. The visual component of this video incorporated these postcards where I would scan the postcard and then digitally cut through Photoshop each individual square. And as the video plays, the squares and pixels would interweave with a family photo of my mother, myself, and my sister in front of a mountain in Banff. And that family image too was received the same sort of digital process, which I scanned and cut the image into the same size pixels. I won't show this work here as it's a bit lengthy, but I will show a edited version during my open studio here on April 30th. So if you're interested in seeing this work, please come. It will be from 12 to 5, I believe. And if we have time later after this presentation, I'm happy to show snippets of the video as well. So at this time, when I was making this work, I came across a text by artist Ken Lum for his work on the Canadian cultural policy, a problem in metaphysics. In this text, Ken refers to two references, one of Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who referred to the complexities of multiculturalism and cultural pluralism as a tapestry in reference to the commonly seen imagery of the Canadian mosaic. And I'm just going to read the quote here. He says, quote, "I prefer the image of tapestry with its many threads. If you go behind a tapestry, all you see is a mass of complicated knots. Too many Canadians only look at the tapestry of Canada that way," end quote. Lum also refers to John Porter's The Vertical Mosaic, where Porter describes how the imagery of the Canadian mosaic of this globalized country who embraces difference is actually unequal in its way that it's vertically distributed and administered from the top down through class, status, and power, and those who are marginalized are further disempowered. And this is where I would like to expand the postcard work during my time at the studio by looking at the postcard as a site for engagement in Canadian identity through the notion of terra nullius, which is Latin for land belonging no one, and an idea and notion in which this nation was built on, and its celebration of Canadian wilderness has historically and continuously ignored the long history and presence of the Indigenous people of this land. Furthermore, how this is complicated with settlers like my mother and my family who came here to this land in constant and relentless search for their dream home and of a good life. I want to engage in this postcard, the collection of postcards that I have through two methods. One is to fracture or disturb the image of the postcard through the oil pastel technique that I was describing earlier, and then using weaving and its technique as a strategy to both describe this complexity and bring forth the complicated knots to the front of the image. I decided on weaving because of how weaving is made. In weaving, we start with the warps. The vertical lines are first placed in a loom, and then we weave with the weft, which are the horizontal lines. And I thought weaving was conceptually interesting in how it speaks to both of the references that I talked about earlier in Ken Lum's writing. In Ken Lum's writing, sorry. And I thought about how weaving is made, where we weave from the top up in rejection to this sort of top-down approach, and then reweaving sort of traditional ideas of horizontality that is often associated with the vastness and emptiness of Canadian landscape. So far in this residency, I've researched different weaving patterns. Here at the top are different basic patterns in weaving. And I've wanted to, incorporate weaving these patterns into the postcards with my pastels. And one of the ways I've done this is by creating here, like for example, this is the 12 weave, or sorry, 12 pattern, which is oftenly used to make denim. And I've been also grappling with whether or not I want to include thread into the postcard. And here is a kind of like trial of me creating sumac knots, isolating certain areas of a landscape. I also wanted to expand on my oil pastel technique, where I'm deliberating on the different kinds of patterns, composition, and determining where and what pastels to use, and what is covered and what is not covered. And this brings me to my second method of engaging with the postcards, and that is to look at how, or deconstruct how mass postcards are commonly made. And I did, for these sort of eras of postcards, these postcards are oftenly made through a offset print through photolithography, where it has multiple cylinders to paste on the different layers of ink, that being cyan, black, magenta, and yellow. And if you look closely at any mass-produced postcards, you'll see these circular forms. And if you zoom a little bit further, you'll get these like patterns, and these patterns are known as the CMYK dot patterns. And what that means is that different colors like cyan, magenta, and yellow and black are placed at different angles. This this instance, cyan here is placed at a 90 degrees, whereas like magenta is placed at a 45 degrees. And then these layers of ink, they kind of compound on top of each other to create another color, like green, for example. And I decided to separate and look further into deconstructing these images by looking at the 4 layers of what the postcard looks like when we separate them into the 4 colors, which then brings me to a drawing that I would like to make for this residency. And here you'll see that I tried to project a image, one of the layers of the mountainscape, onto a placehold of where I would like the canvas to be. My initial thought was to utilize the dot pattern as a stencil to kind of thread through. But this actually posed a bit of a challenge because of the projector I'm using. So that's something I'm still grappling with and deciding on how I would like to display the dot patterns. In the same drawing, I want to revisit a past work that I've made of landscape, of how landscape is commonly viewed through a fixed subject point of view, where there is one vanishing point. And for example, in this piece, I've made this depiction, my own depiction of land, through more of a cross-section perspective. This brings me to the sketch and outline that I want to show. In this sketch, which will be the final composition of the drawing, I want to reassemble certain elements of the postcards that I've been collecting, such as like this figure here who is looking upwards, preying on the bighorn will be placed upwardly, and the canoe, the ends of the canoe kind of poke out at the end. And these sort of gestured marks are actually outlines of perspectives that I often seen in Western paintings and postcards, where maybe I'll show it to you here. There you have like these diagonal triangular lines of forests, and then a vanishing point where the mountain is at the end. And I wanted to create a pattern out of this perspective and fill it in the background. I thought about sewing this pattern onto canvas, but I'm still debating on if that's the route I would like to take, as I think it will take a bit longer than the length of this residency. And here is an outline of the mountainscape. This is a placeholder for the CMYK layer, where I wanted to outline the mountains here. But again, I think this will be a bit more abstract, kind of like the dot patterns that I was referring to in this slide. So this is where I would like to pause and allow space for any questions, thoughts, and about my process and past projects.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Evan.
No problem. So yes, we'd like to open up the floor to any any questions that anyone may have. But for the time being, I'll get us started. I have one question here from myself, which is, how do you imagine expanding on what you've done here at the studio outside of the residency?
So I think there are ideas and thoughts that I've been deciding on that doesn't really fit into the time and scope of this residency. And two of them would be really looking at the printing process of the postcards to develop a practice or a piece that really looks into photolithography as a way of talking about or looking at the dissemination of these postcards. Another component would be really diving into weaving. I think weaving here has been a bit difficult to incorporate with the image. And I think I would like to have more time to expand on this practice, to really look at the threads and to really consider the process of reweaving the Canadian landscape.
Awesome. Thank you very, very much. Actually, I was hoping to see that postcard a little closer up now that we've got the screen sharing off. The one that you showed that had the tree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you
So
very
this
much.
one is actually made out of linen. So it has this fabric quality. And another idea that I had was to sew this postcard onto linen to have this sort of material bridge between the linen and the postcard to expand the image outside of the object. So yes, that's another idea or project to further explore on.
So thank you very much. Okay. What's up next for you in your artistic practice?
I think what I've learned from myself in revisiting my work is I'm really appreciative of the education that I've had at SFU, but I think I would like to develop more techniques, more technical skills, whether that be in painting or in printmaking. Right now, I think I'm just kind of learning or understanding the materials that I'm working with. And oftentimes I've looked or worked with materials mostly through like an installation work or through through objects. And so I would really love to develop a corpus or a practice where I'm physically working with my hands.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Um, Also, how has your time been at the studio? What are some of the challenges you've experienced in your research there so far?
So I've found the studio space quite a luxury and a challenge at the same time. I was talking to Lisa and I told her that this is one of my first spaces after I lost my studio in Chinatown during the height of the pandemic. And at that time, my studio space was also really, really small and I was sharing it with 3 other humans. And in this space, it's quite big. And some of the challenges was just understanding how to utilize the space, but then also trying to understand how to funnel through my ideas. And I realized that a lot of times I have too many ideas. And yeah, so it became both a luxury of like exploring all these ideas, but then also there's a challenge because there's only so much time.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience with a much smaller studio in Chinatown. How long were you there, and what was that experience like?
So I was there for maybe about a year or so. And I had to relocate studios in that building from the upper floor and then in the lower floor. And my experience was was I think really great in the sense that I had the chance to really develop a work, but then also moving through Chinatown was something that was interesting for me. And I never had a large attachment to Chinatown, specifically in Edmonton, where there's not much of Chinatown, but there is still a presence there, but we often don't walk through Chinatown the way that I walk through Chinatown in Vancouver, and then listening to my friends and my peers who talk about the history of Chinatown and how much things have changed. And I really enjoyed my time working in Chinatown and visiting all the shops and the spaces.
Awesome, thank you. Were any of the works that you showed in the slideshow today produced in that studio?
Um, yes, I actually the sketch, the landscape, the landscape piece about land. I developed a liking towards pastels at that time. Before then, I was mostly working in installation and found images. And I really felt attached to this drawing because it was a time where I was reading about Asian futurism and our understanding of space and land, and I wanted to have this sort of futuristic approach to landscape um, and really saw this work as a portal to a separate space.
Awesome, thank you. We have one question from Lisa, which is Phoebe, can you talk a little bit about pattern and reputation in your work? It relates to both the lithoprint and textile practices.
So, repetition or repetition?
Pattern and reputation, I believe. It might be repetition. Might
Okay.
just be a typo.
Um, I think repeating the act of repetition has been something that um, I like to work through, and repetition being, like, for example, the coloring of the squares. There's a repeat of drawing on these squares, and the laborious choice, decision making in doing so, kind of allows me to refer to the printing process of these mass-produced images, and really expand on taking the time to really digest this image. So I think through repetition, it gives me the space and the actual reflection into the material surface of the postcards. I don't know if I fully answered that question. It relates both to the, yes, and then also with weaving as well, this sort of methodology of reweaving the same patterns over and over again as like a space to create space to really dissect and understand the images that we so commonly see.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll give it a moment just to see if we have any other questions roll into the Q&A chat. Do you have any other thoughts or anything that you'd like to share with our audience?
I guess I could like walk you through my space, but it's quite similar to the image that I've shared earlier. I can show that the process of some of the things that I've been doing. I don't know if this will create a bit of motion sickness.
No worries. Thank you.
So here are, perhaps I will start with this one actually. This one is actually missing a postcard, but I'm hoping to create a composition with the repetition of these postcards and then overlaying the pastel in a way that refers to the landscape. So this is a sketch of this image, a really rough sketch, and this is the outline of the hill and the rock that you see here. So I wanted to disturb the image with the landscape within the image. So there's this sort of meta that is going on within this piece. And then for the work that I would like to do here, I'm sorry about the motion here. I wanted to create a series of align with this particular composition of postcards where I cover the top, which is the area that the bottom figures are sort of preying on and rejecting that look by covering the upper portion of the postcard with pastel. And I'm hoping to create more patterns in this postcard, in this series, that is. And then this work here, I've expanded on with since my last exploration of the postcards in 2020, and I'm hoping to create 3 other images that look like these. I'm thinking of maybe flipping these images upside down, so there will be like a reflection of this postcard. And I'm working on these colors of postcards, and this sort of blue cyan one, and this red one. And again, I'm seeing this perspective where we have land or forest, and then you have this vanishing point. And I wanted to emphasize this perspective by perhaps sewing on more thread that would outline this contour of land. Yeah. And right now I'm just sewing the canvas that I would like to work with. And initially I had some of these sketches that this one you saw earlier. And you'll see that I have, like, perhaps zoom in a bit here, these sort of bundles that are drawn again here. And I really wanted to include this bundle of silk that I've been lucky to have, this sort of sculptural quality of thread that I wanted to incorporate somehow. But I think that where I'm at, it might not make complete sense, but I thought about utilizing silk in the bundle of thread to talk about this complicated knots that I refer to, and to perhaps, like, sort of pin these bundles of thread on the side, and then this image then becomes an object or a piece of decor. That's what I thought about working with that as well. And so yes.
Thank you very much for walking us through your process and through showing us all of these works in process on the wall. It's very, very cool to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, do you have any last thoughts or anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up today?
No, it's been great. Thank you so much for hosting, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very, very much. Okay. Um, thank you everyone in our audience for joining us today for Live from the Studio with Phoebe Bei. If you'd like to know more about Griffin Art Projects, you can subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of our website, griffinartprojects.ca. And I believe that's all for me. Thank you everyone for coming today, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Emmett. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.